All right, what is up? Let me unmute for Scott. What is up, you heathens and demons, you sinners and saints, you beautiful blasphemous bastards? Welcome back to the Raging Atheist. And if you saw the conversation last night, you saw a bit of the cray cray, but I guarantee you, I think you're going to enjoy the conversation today because it's not going to be so crazy. Scott Paeth is here, and we're going to start with an interesting discussion. He's going to give a Christian's take on the pro-choice perspective. So that's going to be interesting. Hey, Scott, it's nice, and I'll unmute you. It's nice to see you again. It's been a while. I've been kind of reminding the audience, like, John met you on Twitter, and you came in, and you had the rare chance, and it's not so rare, but the chance to moderate a conversation between me and John Maddox that was just off the rails. I don't expect this will be anything like that conversation was. So, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, that was a bit bonkers. My wife actually came up. She was asleep downstairs when we were doing it, and she kind of was mouthing at me like, "What's going on here?"
Yeah, well, when John wanted to include you in that, I'm like, I don't think that's a good idea.
No, but I actually had a joke. I had a really good time both of the times that I've been on before, and so I'm looking forward to our conversation today.
Yeah, me too. I was because Scott told me in messages, and it just didn't register that he wanted, he would be interested in having a conversation on abortion to give a Christian's perspective on pro-choice. And it didn't register to me. I was telling him before the stream, like, no, I was assuming, because I'm just so used to it, that it didn't click that you were saying pro-choice, because I thought, I was going to have a pro-lifer coming on and just giving like the Christian perspective instead of, because a lot of them try to run away from the Christianity side of it. But Scott's here to actually talk about a Christian's perspective on pro-choice. So I find that really, really intriguing because, like he was saying before the stream, you don't hear that very often, and it'll be interesting to hear what you have to say on it.
Yeah, and so when we were first going back and forth, and you mentioned that you've been talking a lot about abortion, and in light of the Dobbs decision, that makes perfect sense that that's sort of an ongoing topic of conversation. And so we were batting around ideas about what to talk about. I'm like, well, I'm happy to talk about abortion because I think it's really important that the pro-choice Christian perspective on abortion get represented in the public discourse, because it feels to me like what ends up happening is that the way that it gets communicated in public is that either you're not religious and pro-choice, or you are religious and not pro-choice, and there is this third way, which is actually, and there's history here that I'd love to talk about. This is actually more the default among Protestants prior to the mid-1970s, which was that most Protestant Christians were at least nominally pro-choice up until 75, 76, when the Southern Baptist Convention began to stake out a sort of a very strongly pro-life position on the subject. But prior to that, and still today, most mainline Christian denominations have a pro-choice perspective on the question of abortion, at least here in the United States. And so what's happened, though, is that evangelicals kind of jumped on the pro-life train again, like mid-70s, early 1980s, and that sort of began to dominate the discussion about abortion, so that the sort of more classically Protestant position on it, which was the pro-choice position, ended up completely getting washed away in that discourse.
Yeah, and I've never seen the numbers on it, but I've often wondered that, because most of the country is for keeping Roe v. Wade in some way or another. They don't, a good majority of the country is not for getting rid of abortion altogether. And when you consider like the good chunk of the country is of that Christian faith, that does mean that a lot of Christians are on that pro-choice side. They would like to women to have their reproductive rights, as long as we're responsible about it, right? Like as long as we're definitely getting it done as soon as possible. Um, yeah, it does seem like, and you're exactly right. And I've talked about this recently when I did this debate on the party flip and how that was a big motivating factor. A lot of people will focus on just the civil rights aspects of the party flip, which is important. But the thing that really kind of put that nail in the coffin was Roe v. Wade coming down, and what you had talked about, that Southern Baptist Conference, where they flipped and went straight pro-life. And that was kind of like the Republican ticket to really take over the South and get that power base that they wanted down there, utilizing civil rights and that pro-life movement to do so. And I think, like as you said, you really see that start to solidify in the late 70s, early 80s, and then come to fruition in the 90, I think it's the 92 Republican Revolution, is what it's called.
Right. Well, yeah, and really, I mean, if you want to be a little bit cynical about this, and I don't mind being cynical about this, it really comes down to, with the creation of the moral majority in the 1970s, Jerry Falwell and a number of these other folks, there was sort of the question got raised. Well, what are we going to focus on, in order to mobilize our more conservative base? And I think it was Paul Weyrich was the one who basically said, well, abortion is the wedge issue, right? So we have a whole raft of right-wing issues that we want to organize around. And at heart, there is that sort of kind of anti-civil rights, sort of, allegedly states' rights perspective on this thing. But the decision was made that abortion would be the focal point because it was so easy to polarize on that. And Weyrich was nothing if not a political animal. And so he was like, well, let's find the issue that we can most effectively polarize people on. And of course, the more openly racist language that was used, in the South, prior to the 1970s, by then had completely fallen out of favor. So even though there was a very strongly anti-civil rights aspect to all of this sort of right-wing organizing in the 70s and 80s, they couldn't be open about that, right? So what are we going to organize around that's going to be effective? And so they settled on abortion.
Yeah.
It's not to suggest that there wasn't a sincere objection to abortion on their part. In many cases there were. But the point is that it's a shift, right? That prior to like 73 was when Roe v. Wade came down. And Frank Schaeffer, who is the son of the great evangelist Francis Schaeffer, I mean, great in the sense of very prominent, but also really sort of an intellectually formidable guy. But Frank Schaeffer was his son, still is his son. But he will tell the story in a number of his books, and he and I have talked about this in the past, about the way that he himself, even though he now identifies as pro-choice, was really the catalyst for getting evangelicals on board for the pro-life cause, because he had just had a child, and then he read about Roe v. Wade. He was outraged by it, and the key moment was when he was able to get his father, who again was very prominent in evangelical circles, get him on board with it. And then his father worked with C. Everett Koop, right? Former, at the time he hadn't been the Surgeon General of the United States. That was still in the future, but he was a very prominent conservative medical ethicist. I'm not exactly sure how you would classify him, doctor. So C. Everett Koop and Francis Schaeffer worked together on this series of videos that then became sort of the basis for organizing around pro-life issues in evangelical circles. And then again, the Southern Baptist Convention got on board with that, with Jerry Falwell and others. There's a big right-wing shift in the Southern Baptist Convention. And so that's how you then get to the point where by the mid to late 1980s, the the pro-choice perspective had really colonized a lot of the discourse in Protestant circles on this issue. Catholics were always pro-life on that stuff, and I teach at a Catholic university. I'm happy to talk about that. But from the Protestant and evangelical perspective, it was a big lurch to the right in order to kind of create this sort of kind of pro-life or anti-choice perception in the audience.
Yeah.
But you're right. I mean, you just have to look at the Venn diagram, right? Most Americans are pro-choice. Most Americans are religious. The majority of those are Christian. So the Venn diagram alone simply says, well, so most of these Christians are going to be at least to one degree or another pro-choice.
Yeah, exactly. And I make the mistake a lot of times because I talk to a lot of evangelicals, and I'll get into trouble when I talk about the pro-life movement as being an evangelical Christian movement. And there's a lot of pro-life people that aren't even Christian or definitely aren't evangelical. But I still mainly see it as that because I understand the history, like you were talking about, that this became the rallying cry of evangelicals politically to rally around these very conservative ideals. And you're exactly right. It was these few people being the voices of that that have propelled it, and it did flip it to where this so quote unquote religious matter, which really isn't. It's a political matter and a legal matter and a right to privacy matter. But they turned it into this quote unquote religious matter that over a period of time, because they were very loud about it, it just spread and spread and spread until we get to where we are today, which is a lot of misinformation out there, a lot of faulty language trying to describe one side or the other instead of talking about the real issue, which is where do the moral lines lay, and let's have that conversation so we can decide where they lay, and then we can regulate accordingly.
Yeah, and I was talking about this with my daughter the other day, and she's 16. And one of the question that she had for me was, well, is there a non-religious pro-life argument, right? I said, well, there are. There are people who will make pro-life arguments on the basis of philosophical arguments about human rights, the nature of personhood, and things like that. But at least on my analysis, when you kind of just boil that stuff down, it fundamentally becomes a sectarian religious argument, right? It's very hard, once you kind of scrape away all of the extraneous stuff, to get away from the fact that there's a metaphysical argument being made, and that metaphysical argument is motivated by an understanding of personhood that's fundamentally a religious perspective, and not even a universally religious perspective, but a sectarian religious perspective.
Well, yeah, definitely, and I've argued it because you can. You can look to the Bible. It says clearly when you draw your first breath, that's when personhood's established. The Jews pretty much predominantly looked at it that way for most of their history. I don't know much about the modern Jewish folk, but I'm assuming they probably still look at it around the same way. What shouldn't really be a religious issue, you're right, because of this metaphysical aspect of it, this pretty much them trying to assign personhood at the moment of conception, it has convoluted the argument. And now, I have to imagine for a person such as yourself, it probably becomes aggravating, if people know that you're a Christian and assume that you take that pro-life stance, because that's not necessarily the case. And it's become this huge misconception in the country that I myself kind of vocalize a lot of times, and really need to start reining that in, because there's probably a lot of people out there just like you, as we said, talk about that Venn diagram, that aren't on that pro-life side, are willing to be reasonable and are willing to have a reasonable discussion about it.
Yeah. Well, and even there, I mean, every year I go to the Society of Christian Ethics meeting. And, quite often, and of course, that's made up of people who are kind of from a number of different Christian outlooks. There's a lot of Catholics there. There are a lot of Protestants there. There's some Orthodox folks there and a few evangelicals, but not as many as I think a lot of us would like. And in those conversations, what you see is that even in the Catholic camp, you'll have a lot of people who are sort of well, it's sort of like the Joe Biden Catholic perspective, right? I'm pro-choice, I'm pro-life personally, but when it comes to what the law should be, I don't think that the law should necessarily reflect my religious objection to abortion, right? And so they will still be sort of pro-choice from the legal perspective, even if they're pro-life from a moral or ethical perspective. And even there are nuances and gradations about what that means. I remember having a conversation with a colleague of mine who's a Catholic priest, and you would think Catholic priest, this guy's going to be very much on the hard right of the pro-life perspective, but he had actually quite a nuanced point of view on the subject, which was to say that he was, because part of the issue here from an ethical perspective is, well, you say life begins at conception. But what is conception, right? So we don't even have a good definition of what conception is, right?
Yes.
And so you say, well, is it the moment that sperm meets egg? Well, if it's the moment sperm meets egg, well, the number of pregnancies that spontaneously abort before the woman even knows she's pregnant is, I don't know what the exact numbers are, but it's substantial, right? And so you say, well, that's a lot of loss of human life, and then you have to ask, well, what would it entail if we could, if we had to make sure that every fertilized embryo was protected to the fullest extent possible? What would that mean in terms of women's freedom or autonomy? Or do we just not care about it until you actually know that there's a pregnancy, right? And then, all those other pregnancies that we never know about, we just don't care.
Yeah. Right. Ladies, smoking's you're 4 weeks pregnant and you haven't quit smoking yet. You're going to jail.
Right, exactly. or just you're riding your bike. You didn't know you were pregnant, right? But see, that's the thing. If you really take this seriously and you sort of kind of unravel the sweater all the way down, it really does deeply damage any conception we have of women's rights or autonomy. Because you say, if you could even potentially be pregnant, you have to be, your freedom has to be constrained in order to allow that fertilized embryo to make its way down the fallopian tubes and implant in your uterus. Well, my friend, the Catholic priest, his attitude was that conception doesn't really commence until implantation in the uterine wall. Now that's interesting because, of course, that actually, aside from, again, and this is not the Vatican perspective on this, this is just his analysis of it, but that actually gives you a lot more wiggle room in terms of things like, for example, contraception, right? Because, for example, birth control pills and IUDs prevent implantation. So, they become, viable means by which to use contraception, right? Of course, Catholics have their own perspective on contraception as well that I find a little bit bizarre, but if it's only when it implants in the uterine wall, then that's a very different conversation than the conversation that says it begins at the moment that sperm meets ovum.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly, and oftentimes, like when I ask that question of pro-life evangelicals, they don't, it is that when sperm meets egg, which is. To me, just problematic. For me, as I've looked into it, I settled around, I think it was 24 to 28 weeks when EEGs are first starting to develop. I say yes, that's personhood. We define our death as the loss of that. So it seems like that would be our beginning as well. But once you're into that conversation where you're just talking, the first week or two, then you're into that. Like, yes, at that point, there's no time to make a reasonable. Most people don't even know they're pregnant until they're 4 to 6 weeks.
4 to 6 weeks, yeah.
So, it's hard to find people that are it seems really reasonable, and I wonder, like with the Catholic perspective, because even if it starts with the uterine wall, which is probably I don't know how many
7 days,
like a week, something like that.
Yeah.
that they probably still is that where they're placing like personhood, or is that just like where, because I try to like really define that, because a lot of they'll focus on scientists say life begins at conception. I'm like, well, they don't really say that. They say human development begins at conception, and I agree.
Yeah. Right, and that's what I've talked about this actually. I was in a conversation with someone about this just recently, and it may have been a Facebook debate. And I was making precisely that point, that there's equivocation taking place here, right? That you say, well, human life begins at conception, right? And then like Congress people are like grandstanding at committees saying, well, no human's ever given birth to a chicken, so it must be a human life, and so and the point, of course, is that the issue isn't is it a life? It is a living thing. It is cells, and they're growing and they're developing. It is genetically human. Okay, granted. That neither of those is the point, right? At least from my perspective. If you say that's the point, it seems to me that again, all of these radical implications about what does that mean for women's autonomy have to come into play. But the real question is, what constitutes personhood?
Yeah.
Right. And again, in the conversation with my daughter, I said to her, well, I mean, from my perspective, the first, the trimesters model is imperfect, but it's a good guideline, right? And I think that it's inarguable to me that in the first few weeks, right, and at the stage of the blastocyst in the embryo, that there's nothing there that can constitute a person from a moral perspective, right? The blastocyst is only about 8 to 10 cells. And so it's hard for me to look at that and say, well, that's a person, right? And I don't think it's a good moral case that it is. On the other hand, once you get into the second trimester, I think you can make an argument there that personhood is commenced, but I still think it's a weak argument. And you can make a much stronger argument by the time you get to the third trimester. But second and third trimester abortions are sort of a different kind of moral argument, because most of the time there you're talking about wanted pregnancies that are affected by complications, that put the mother's life or health at risk. And so then you have to ask about the relative moral weight of the mother vis-a-vis the fetus. And so in those situations, I would say, even if it's a person, the mother's well-being prevails.
Yeah, I agree totally. I had that conversation because, so many, oftentimes in this conversation, it gets convoluted to where, make sure my daughter's out of the room again, to make sure they try to, the other side will try to oftentimes make it seem like, second and third trimester pregnancies occur all the time, and this is a great moral injustice when they don't. Most people are making these decisions rather early, and you're right. Once you're into that second, third trimester, even if you haven't established personhood yet, you've personalized that in your mind. You've accepted the pregnancy. Outside of some like prenatal depressions that might come along for some people. Generally speaking, you've accepted it. You're not going to have an abortion at that point of the pregnancy unless it's pretty much a medical necessity, especially third trimester pregnancies. It's such a rarity that it hardly ever happens. And I think the last time I looked at it, there's really only 2 hospitals in the entire United States that actually do it because it's so rare.
Yeah, I don't know how. I know it's incredibly rare. I don't know what the frequency is, but I think south of 1%.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And again, those are tragic circumstances, which are only compounded when you make it harder and harder for the woman to actually get an abortion in those situations. And we've seen, even since the Dobbs decision came down, doctors hesitating to perform abortions in situations where the woman's life and health are definitely at risk, because they're afraid that unless they can demonstrate that there was a genuine risk to the mother's life, which means, of course, she's got to be at death's door. I think they begin to suspect that they're afraid they're going to get prosecuted if they participate in abortion. So that's what that's going to mean. Is that going to mean not only are more women's lives going to be at risk, but more women are going to die, even when medical help is available to them. They're going to die because doctors are going to hedge their bets against getting prosecuted versus being sued by the woman's family or something, right? And I will say this too, and this is, I think, something that I haven't seen a lot of reflection on. The restrictions, the increasing restrictions, and now the virtual bans on early abortions are going to increase the number of second-term abortions. Because the harder it becomes for you to get an abortion in the first trimester, the more likely it's going to be that by the time you actually are able to get one, you're going to be in the second trimester.
Yeah.
So this is actually, so if you want to have the argument about personhood, by pushing abortion, now, of course, the people who are against this think it's person from conception anyway, so they don't, right, if it's all the same. But if you believe that there is some meaningful distinction between, an embryo in the third or fourth week and an embryo in the third or fourth month, then when you push it into the second trimester, then you're actually first of all making it riskier for the woman, and second of all, you're again encroaching more and more on that point at which it is, in which it is much more strongly arguable that personhood persists.
That's a great point. You're right. I haven't considered that point, and I haven't heard that point anywhere. And that is, you're right, because a lot of these people in these states, despite these states are now seemingly trying to take action to prevent them from going to other states that would have abortion. Even if they don't take that action, just by that alone, for most people, they're going to have to get a hold of a doctor in another state. They're going to have to make arrangements to get there, to stay there. It's going to take much longer for them to actually do the procedure than it would have if they had just had access where available to them there. And you're right, that's going to push it from that they're making a very responsible early decision to now pushing it into that second trimester type of territory, and you're going to have more and more of those, and increase a much bigger increase in those. And I never considered that once. And another great point that you made was the pressures on doctors. I saw this fascinating CNN piece, and I know right-wingers hate CNN now. I'm not a big fan, but sometimes they put out good work, and this was a fascinating piece of about the 10-year-old rape victim, but the Ohio attorney general or whatever that went after the abortion doctor, or maybe it wasn't Ohio, but the other state, and now this physician is coming out saying, hey, this is like the worst case scenario, because now you're making doctors afraid, not only for they're going to be taken to court, but now you're calling them out publicly, and they're going to have to worry about activists showing up at their homes and being afraid for the lives of their family, and we saw this a lot. We've seen this a lot throughout the abortion debate. I'm thinking of Bill O'Reilly, and specifically, who singled out this one individual abortion doctor, and one of his rabid viewers saw that a bit too much and went and killed the doctor.
Right. I still remember that. His name was Diller.
Yeah.
And he was killed at church.
Yeah.
That's, again, bringing it back to the theme here. This was a guy, he was, I believe he was Lutheran, if I'm recalling correctly. And he was just going to church on a Sunday morning, and this guy came into his church and shot him. And the other thing about the doctor, and it was Indiana, where
Indiana
have an abortion, is that the attorney general in Indiana just flat out lied about that, and said, well, she didn't submit the proper paperwork, and that's a crime, and she's going to be investigated for this. When she did everything she was supposed to do, she filled out the paperwork, she reported it, she did everything according to the law, and this guy, just without even investigating, decided he was going to demonize her. I mean, I find that enraging.
Yeah. And that's going to scare doctors. It's very intimidating and enraging.
That's its intent. Yeah. It's intended to intimidate doctors, just like the Texas bounty hunter bill is intended to intimidate anyone who might choose to help a woman, and that bill is unconscionable. The fact that of course it's they're not even trying to hide the ball, right? They say, well, if you sue somebody for participating in helping someone with an abortion, then you can both get your bounty from them and then also recover court costs. But if you are the person sued, you can't recover court costs. So if somebody accused me in Texas of aiding and abetting an abortion, and I had to go and defend myself in court, and it was found to be a groundless accusation, then I would still have to pay my attorney's fees.
That's insane.
And it's like the only possible motive for this is simply to frighten people far away from any participation in abortion, even being the guy who drives the Uber to the airport so you can fly to Illinois to get an abortion.
To put it in perspective, it's like, if we lived back in the day and we saw legislation come down to punish those in the Underground Railroad trying to help slaves escape the South. It's essentially the same thing as, oh, you want to do a good thing for a human being? You want to help them? We're gonna punish you for that. It seems like the most backwards. For America, it's like fundamentally what I would deem un-American.
Yeah, no, I mean it's like they got their inspiration from the Fugitive Slave Act.
Yeah.
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 But by the way, speaking of Indiana and Ohio, the thing, and it had never really even occurred to me until after Dobbs, when people started like putting up these maps of all the places where abortion was going to be illegal all of a sudden, that if you look at like where I live in Illinois, if you look at like every single solitary state around Illinois is has some form of abortion ban in place. I think actually, including Michigan and Wisconsin.
Yeah, our legislature has gotten more and more right wing, and I'm not up on the current laws here in Michigan, but I've heard. I don't think that. I think it's pretty hard to get an abortion here now.
Right, so which means that basically Illinois is the hub of any of pro-choice in the Midwest. And even there, I mean, if you know Illinois, what you're really talking about is Chicago.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's like Chicago is the one thing that prevents Illinois from tipping right over into that category with a lot of these other states, because we're basically we're Indiana to the east, and we're Iowa and Missouri to the west, and Kentucky to the south. Yeah. So it's just like it's like everywhere you go, we are surrounded by these anti-choice states, which means that it's vitally important in a state like Illinois that we continue to work to keep abortion safe and legal.
Yeah, and I agree. This little area of I guess it's called the Midwest, although I think it's Mid-East is what it should be called. But yeah, this little Rust Belt area that we live in, it has went increasingly right, and Michigan has, and you're exactly right about Chicago. A lot of people, they focus on the city, but like if you get outside of the city into rural Chicago, it's a totally different story. It is the city of Chicago, the fact that so many people live there, that keeps Illinois a blue state.
Yeah,
which is really scary, because if they weren't, then a lot of these states, women would basically have literally hardly no access at all.
Yeah, I mean, and that is why, and it's one of the reasons why Dobbs is such a travesty. Because it really has created this untenable situation for so many women all around the country. And again, the problem is you can say, well, I'm pro-life because of these moral reasons, and I can respect the moral reasons, but then you have to ask about the question of, well, what are the implications for all of these other things, right? And the problem is that they don't consider that. In the cases that we've seen, even in the few weeks since Dobbs has demonstrated that. They haven't considered, what do you do about the 10-year-old rape victim? What do you do about the woman having an ectopic pregnancy? What do you do about the woman having a miscarriage, right?
Yep.
How are these things handled? And so somebody, even if you're pro-life and you're sincerely pro-life, then you have to be able to account for these situations, because otherwise, you're going to save, maybe some pregnancies, but there are going to be a lot of born women who are going to die.
Yep.
We talked we used to talk about back alley abortions, right, as being, coat hanger abortions and things like that being the risk factor.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really think that's the risk factor. I mean, obviously, in some cases it will be, but the real risk factor is just going to be women who are otherwise in high risk pregnancy situations, who are going to die because they can't get proper medical care. And fortunately, because of medical abortion now, you can, if you need to, you can. But again, these are going to be things that they're going to start to like shut this down and shut this down. But I can mail you like RU-486 from Illinois to Texas, right? And you can deal with it that way. That's going to become a way that this is done. And those abortions, particularly if they're done early enough, tend to be very safe, right? But a woman never has to go into an abortion clinic, never has to even see a doctor in the state, right? So they're going to start trying to shut those things down.
Yep.
Right. So, but that actually will at least solve some of the problem of, the risk of so-called back alley abortions and coat hanger abortions, things like that. But again, I mean, it's the 10-year-old rape victim. It's the woman with the ectopic pregnancy. It's the woman who is miscarrying 6 months, 8 months into her pregnancy, who the doctor won't help because he's afraid that he's going to get prosecuted. Those are the women who are going to die because of this.
Exactly. Yeah. It might become back alley abortions might become an issue in some states where it's especially hard, especially if they start, really focusing on people are trying to go to these blue states. If they start trying to legislate that and make that illegal, you might see a resurgence. But I think you're exactly right. The main effect is going to be just the lack of acceptable medical care that these people have access to is going to lead to a lot more death. And I think I really think that they overplayed their hand here, because this was a very fundamental ruling and a very dispopular ruling. And you see, like, the Republican Party, they're blaming it on the January 6th hearings, but what looked like a red wave in this midterm election, now it looks really, really close. Republicans are down from +4 to +1 since March, and they're putting that on the January 6th hearings. But what else happened at that time? It was the leak that came out about this ruling and the uproar ever since that. I think that they've really played their hand and they've jeopardized. I think they're kind of waking up a lot of people. Like, nobody's saying Joe Biden is great, but these people are taking your freedom away, and that's a huge difference. I think a lot of people are like, we can deal with Biden for a couple more years, but we can't have this. Right.
No, I agree with you, and I mean, just from an electoral politics stance, I mean, it's bad for the Republicans. They'll probably still lose the House, the Democrats. Because it's so thoroughly gerrymandered. Frankly, I'm always amazed that they're able to hold on to it in any given year.
Mm-hmm.
But I have my fingers crossed. Maybe things will break our way.
And historically, the opposing party, like whoever's not in the presidency, the other party, historically midterms, no matter what the July numbers say, they outperform the July numbers. So, but it is this swing though. Like, it's a definite. +4 to +1, and then at the same time, new polls are coming out. Donald Trump himself is losing ground, which is, I think indicative. People are up in arms about this, and this is unacceptable to a lot of people. And I think one thing my side really needs to acknowledge is, or me specifically, I'm not my side. I think I probably do it a lot more than most people on my side is. Pointing that finger and Christianity wants this when no, there's a lot of Christians out there that don't want this insanity at all. And
Yeah, no,
I need to
absolutely.
remember that, you know.
Well, that's why I'm glad I'm here to help you kind of continue to bring that to mind. Um, but this is, I mean, again, like I look at like my denomination, the United Church of Christ, has always been. I mean, actually, I mean, if you're looking at for a denomination that's going to be like on the right side of all of these issues, the
Mm.
UCC is pretty good on most of these things. If only we were a better organized denomination, right? But because the joke, the Will Rogers line about I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat.
Yeah.
I often feel that's my response when it comes to the United Church of Christ. Is I say I don't believe in organized religion. I belong to the United Church of Christ, right? Um, but we've always been a pro-choice on abortion, and we've always been, well, always since the late 1970s, we've been ordaining LGBT folk
See, that's awesome.
and marrying LGBT folk and ordaining LGBT folk. And actually, we were the first denomination, or at least one of our precursor denominations, was the first denomination here in the United States to ordain women. So, for me, when I look at that tradition of progressive Christianity, the UCC is very much in that
That's
thing. And that's where I want to be the guy who's talking about progressive Christianity rather than
that's
this
awesome.
retrograde forms.
And I've recently seen some numbers, good news for a change, because when it comes to gay marriage, 71% of the country is for keeping it, for codifying it, for making it law. That means an awful lot of Christians are out there. It seems like the progressive message on that issue, on that front, is really starting to take hold. Like for the first time, like when I saw those numbers, I'm like, yeah, the country's starting to change a bit,
Well, it was almost like, I mean, if you remember after Obergefell, it was almost like flipping a switch.
Mm-hmm.
You saw, it was like you'd see the numbers went, I think, from majority against gay marriage. Then Obergefell happened. Then it flipped almost immediately to a
Yeah.
majority in favor of gay marriage. But of course, now they're going after Obergefell.
Mm.
I
Yeah.
mean, Thomas made that clear in his dissent. And now Ted Cruz has been talking about it. So you just know that within the next couple of years, they're going to bring a suit trying to overturn Obergefell.
Yeah, and they're trying to codify it, and I hope they do. But I think we just saw I think it was like 154 Republicans voted against it, and like one of the main stories being talked about right now, one of the Republicans that voted against it, 3 days before attended his son's marriage to another man. So it's like just the blatant hypocrisy, the fact that clearly you don't have an issue with this. You're happy for your son. You attended the marriage. You was part of the wedding. But politically, you have to go up there and vote against it. It's crazy.
And by the way, I think about, because, you mentioned Trump a moment ago. I think one of the best things that could happen for progressives, for Democrats, just to the extent that they're progressive, but to the left side of the spectrum, one of the best things that could happen would be if Ron DeSantis got the Republican nomination instead of Donald Trump, because I guarantee, I will put cash money, Donald Trump will not be able to stop himself from running as an independent if that happens.
I think you're exactly right. Yeah.
And if that happens, it's going to split the MAGA vote, and the Republicans are going to be completely lost. So, I mean, to some degree, I worry much more that Trump actually gets the nomination again, because I think if he does, he's got a genuine chance of winning. God help us.
Yeah, because Biden's just not. Yeah, to me, it's really the only way Joe Biden wins the presidency again is if the Republican ticket gets split. And it looks like that's a real possibility, because I think you're exactly right. I don't think Trump's going to go away just because DeSantis wins the nomination. He might even pull the cheating card again,
Oh yeah, he'll definitely do that. It's the only card he has.
Yeah.
I mean, every time he loses, it's because someone else cheated, right? It's I mean, and that's the thing. So when I see him kind of continuing to go back to that well, and I say to myself, well, this is literally, he's like he's Johnny One Note on this stuff, and that's the reason why he's losing so much support, because there are people who are willing to like go with him to a certain degree, but then they're like, okay, but now what, right? We want to move forward, and so then they say, now who's going to bring us forward in our authoritarian agenda? And Ron DeSantis mortal enemy of Walt Disney, is apparently the person who's going to push us forward.
Well, yeah, and that's it exactly, because a lot of Democrats, my peoples can be so short-sighted because, I agree. Like the January 6th hearings have been effective. They've done a much better job than I ever thought that they could do. But that's not why people are turning against Trump. You're exactly right. The people that are with Trump now are willing to go all the way with him, but to them, DeSantis is a lot less baggage and a possible 8 years as opposed to 4. And to them,
Right.
it's all a number game. So a lot of Democrats are like, yeah, Trump is losing because the January 6th committee. Trust me, Trump's people ain't even watching that. He's losing.
Right.
He's losing ground because DeSantis is out there with his foot on the pedal, and he's not allowing Trump to just run away with it.
Right.
So yeah, I definitely think that it's going to be an interesting cycle once we get past midterms and see who wins out on the Republican side.
Yeah, and I guess I can only just hope that that they're able to that the Democrats are not only able to hold, but at least but even expand their lead in the Senate.
Mm,
Because if we can get to a point where we have enough senators willing to eliminate the filibuster, then once the filibuster's gone, it's gone forever. And if
mm,
we don't do it, the Republicans will definitely do it the first time they think they have a reason to.
yep,
Right.
I
The
agree.
only reason they didn't do it under Trump is because they didn't have a reason to, because they were getting everything they wanted,
Yep.
which was very little. They just wanted their tax bill, right? Um, and they got that, and then they lost the next wave of elections, and then there was no reason to get rid of it for them until then. So, but as soon as Mitch McConnell, it doesn't have a scruple to his name, right? I mean that he is the least ethical person I
Yep.
have ever seen in public life, and that's saying a lot. Um,
Yeah,
and
he's something else. It's I saw a meme the other day about leaving him with Sydney from Toy Story as an actual turtle in a kid's pool, and it was.
but, but yeah, but if he thinks that he can get political advantage out of eliminating the filibuster, he
Mm,
won't hesitate. He didn't hesitate over the what do you call it? The well the Merrick Garland nomination.
yep.
He didn't hesitate over the Amy Coney Barrett nomination, right? Which was a complete reversal,
Yeah,
complete unprincipled reversal.
like he would never hesitate with the just say no to Obama policy that he had, even when Obama was trying to throw them bones just to get something done. Here's what you've wanted for 20 years. And Mitch is like, nope, because
Yeah,
you're giving it to me.
right, exactly. And so the idea that he would like have some principled objection to getting rid of the filibuster when it becomes politically advantageous
Mm,
is absurd. So since it's going to go away eventually anyway, it's better that it go away on our terms rather than on someone else's terms, so that
I
we
agree.
can get done what we want to get done. And I absolutely do not understand what Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema. I mean, well, I do. I mean, I don't think they're sincere about it. I think that they've just got political interests that prevent them from signing on for it.
Mm.
But they couch it in these principled things about bipartisanship. But the filibuster actually prevents bipartisanship. It doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. And you're exactly right. They have to know, especially now, since our side's been talking about it so openly. Expand the court, end the filibuster. Yeah, if they get power, they're going to do it immediately.
Yeah. Well, they may not do it immediately, because if they don't need to do it, they won't do
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Right?
They'll do it
But if
immediately
they,
as soon as it's advantageous for them to do so. Yeah.
right. Yeah, because they want what they want. Because again, McConnell knows this stuff. If he can get everything he wants without getting rid of the filibuster,
Are
then
you
he's
just
happy
now
to keep the
eating?
filibuster so that he can use it
No,
against
it's an hour
us.
later.
And then as soon as we're going to take advantage of it on the same terms, he'll get rid of it because he doesn't need it. So he'd throw his mother off the side of a cliff if he thought it would do him any political advantage whatsoever.
All right, sorry about that. You didn't hear it, but the audience did because I've got two mute buttons I'm supposed to hit now. But so before this stream, I did my daughter's blood to have
Oh yeah.
lunch, and then I started the stream, and she's always good about eating her lunch. She got on her phone and forgot, and she's just now like getting her lunch, and I'm like, it's an hour later. How are you not even feeling that? You took all this insulin.
Oh no. Oh no. That's yeah.
Oh gosh.
I'm sorry. That sounds like a struggle.
Yeah, it's um I mean, she's fine, thankfully. Uh,
What a sandwich
so
for
eat
that
up,
girl.
yeah, eat up. Yeah, I totally agree, and it's so nice. Yeah, because I know they're out there. A good chunk of a good chunk of our political aisle. I'm a lefty. I won't presume that you're a lefty, but a good chunk of our political aisle are religious folks, are Christian folks, and I've been in this space for 4 years now, and I think you might be the first actual Christian person where I had this reasonable political discussion with that wasn't unhinged, and it just seems like too oftentimes YouTube, the representation of Christianity we get here on YouTube is not a real reflection of Christianity as a whole. And that's something that I really need to remember because I talk to the praises, I talk to all of these different people that just get unhinged. I had an unhinged conversation last night where I can't have a basis for morality, and no, there's a lot of good religious folk out there that are very reasonable and that don't fit into this box that a lot of us want to put it into. So it's good. Man, I'm glad that I had this conversation with you today, so I could
Yeah.
get
Well,
that
yeah,
reminder.
we're out there. I mean, like I said, I mean, again, just think about the Venn diagram. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
most of the people who consider themselves religious, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or what have you, are going to be, are going to be at the very least in the political center. And on this issue, probably most of them are going to be to one degree or another pro-choice. But I was actually years ago now. I was actually a member of the religion and socialism section of the Democratic Socialists of the United States.
Oh wow,
Consider myself a religious socialist, and
so you are a
so
lefty.
oh yeah, no, I'm a lefty. I'm when those political diagram quizzes that you do where they've got like you can be like authoritarian or democratic or authoritarian or libertarian, and then what's like conservative. I don't remember how it breaks down, right? But I'm
Yeah,
always sort of like right, left, authoritarian, libertarian, I guess is the way it breaks down. I always wind up on the libertarian left
yeah,
when I
me
take
too.
those quizzes, so and I look at who else is in that square with me, and I'm like, yeah, I'm comfortable with that.
Yeah. Yes, me too. I always fall on that, and it is a weird framing because I think libertarian. I think American libertarian, far right wing. But yeah, that I always fall on that libertarian line.
Well, that's why, I mean, when I think about that, Noam Chomsky makes this point
Mm,
somewhere where he says, libertarian as a term used to mean anarchist, right? It used to mean, the folks like Kropotkin and
mm,
Bakunin and Proudhon, right? Those were your libertarians, and they were all on the left. They were all anti-capitalist,
yeah,
right? What happened in the United States was that this got sort of kind of tangled up with American individualism and conceptions of, kind of the virtue of capitalism, so that then it became this idea of libertarianism as being pro-capitalist, right? And there you get your Ayn Rands and your Robert Nozick's and folks like that. But I've always identified with the libertarian socialist end of the political spectrum, and
that's awesome.
I think that there's a long tradition of Christian socialism, and I definitely plant my flag in that camp.
Yes, that's the other thing a lot of people don't realize is socialism used to be all through America. There used to be socialist teachers, doctors. They were most of them Christian because most of the people back in the 40s and 50s were Christian.
Yeah,
And socialists were everywhere. It wasn't until World War II and afterwards that we got rid of all the socialists. To the point that it's been this great running away from FDR and what FDR was trying to do pre World War II.
right. Which wasn't even really socialist to any
Yeah,
degree.
no,
Right?
yeah.
But I think about like Eugene Debs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm looking for a quote here. Um, hoping I could do this smoothly so I could pretend that I just knew this quote by heart. And of course, I find it. There it is. There's the quote. So, but Eugene Debs was sort of the classic, Christian socialist model, as a representative of the Socialist Party in the United States. And the quote that I always like by Debs is when he says, where there is a lower class, I am in it. And where there is a criminal element, I am of it. And while there is a soul in prison, I am not free. And that to me is a manifesto. That's a manifesto for what it means to be a socialist. But to me, it's also a manifesto for what it means to be a Christian.
That's awesome. Yeah, I would say the same. It seems like that's a good manifesto for just being a humanist,
Absolutely.
and yeah, man. So I've talked about this for about a week now that this was going to happen. Pretty much since we decided on Tuesday, and I'm like, and like I told you, I thought you was coming in pro-life. So I'm like, I'm talking to this really smart Christian, so I could be in trouble, guys. I could be in trouble. And it turns out, y'all, that this really smart Christian agrees with me on a lot of stuff.
Or actually, I would say you agree with me.
Yeah, I agree with the really smart Christian on a lot of stuff. Well, Scott, thank you so much for coming in. I want to do this again. I would love to cover other topics and delve into, just have some nice religious conversations with you. Like I said,
Sure.
it's very rare on this platform when I can just have a decent conversation with a person and we're not trying to take each other's head off. We're not trying to get the better of the other person. I found it refreshing.
I don't dig that stuff at all. I'm much for having a good conversation with someone where we can agree and disagree and just learn from one another.
I agree, man. This was so much fun. I want to thank you for coming on. I think we both agreed on an hour. I could probably do this all day, but I do want to get in there and make sure that she's okay. I'm gonna have to check her blood just to see where she's at.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on, man.
Anytime, next time you want to do this, just let me know, and I'll come on anytime you ask me.
Yeah, I definitely. Be looking for me in your inbox. Definitely.
I will. All right.
Thanks a lot, Scott, and thank you guys for watching. I'm gonna go check on my daughter. So yeah, if you liked it, hit the subscribe, hit the thumbs up, all that good stuff. Thank you, Scott, and I'll see you guys soon. And yeah, I'm doing this on OBS, so I got to pull that up and actually do my outro. So, Scott, you won't hear the music, but there will be an outro, and then eventually we'll be off. So,
all right, take care.
All right, yep, have a good one. So, all right, thanks a lot, y'all.